Okay, first set today. This set actually hasn't caught anything yet since I put it out here, and it's in a pretty good spot. There's water really close to here, and there's a possum in here. And possums, this is a pretty small possum really, but a big possum fur is going to be worth good money this year for those of you who are trapping. Insider information from Napa says that big possums may go up to $6. So no longer are they a nuisance animal that you just want to chuck out of your trap line. Possums are worth the time to skin out and flesh now at $6 for a large possum. So we're going to let this guy go and do a reset and move on. Okay, real quick while we're doing this reset, and I don't have a tripod out here, but I want to show you guys something on this trap. This is an MB 450, a Minnesota brand 450, and you can see that there's a space between these jaws even when the trap is closed. And the jaws on it are really wide, and they're made out of cast steel. And that is to keep from damaging the animal as bad. So he gets his leg pinched in between here when these levers come up on the springs. But it won't close all the way around. It'll stop on the bone. And it's not going to break the bone, even on a small possum like that. When I let him go, he took off running. And he's going to have a numb foot for a day or so. But he'll be none the worse for wear within a week. So these traps are made to be very humane in nature and be able to let non-target animals go. So we'll do a reset right here. And this is where the set was. And basically there is a dirt hole in the bank, and this is right on the main trail. We'll get this dude reset and move on. Okay, so here's what our reset looks like. And again, I think a lot of people make the mistake of trying to make sets a little bit too perfect. I like to make them kind of random. I don't like things in the animal's face where he can't stick his nose in the hole. And I like to give him plenty of room to get in there. And he's rooting around that hole, and it's deep enough. He's going to step in that trap sooner or later. So let's move to the next one. Morning guys, Dave Canterbury at the Pathfinder School. Got a couple coyotes here that I need to flush out. These are the ones that we've caught on the trap line over this last week. And I basically just put them up on a stretcher right side out until I got a chance to flush them. Now, you really don't want to wait that long to flush a hide if you can help it, because what's going to happen is it's going to be a lot more of a pain in your tail end to flush that hide at that point, because the meat's going to start to dry out. But if you have to wait that long, you have to wait that long. It's just kind of the way it is. And if you've got meat on the hide, actual meat, like that right there, you may have to take your knife to trim that off. But try to get the most of the fat and stuff that you can off with your flushing knife. Now, if you are going to tan this hide yourself, you're really going to want to get as much off of it as you can. If you're going to sell this hide to a tannery, they're not so picky. If you leave a little bit on there, it's not that big a deal, because they run it through a machine anyway to actually flesh the hide before they tan it, and it kind of thins it a little bit before the tanning process. So it's not a major league deal, but a flushing knife is completely different than a draw knife, and a lot of people get confused with that, and they are different. A flushing knife is dull. Usually they're curved a little bit. They've got one leading edge that's got a bevel, but it's a dull knife. If this knife were sharp and you slip sideways with it, you're going to cut a hole in your hide. So you want this thing to be fairly dull for that reason. And then you want your flushing beam, whatever you're using for the beam to flush your hide, you're going to want that thing to be fairly smooth so that you don't run over a bump on your flushing beam and end up with a hole in your hide. So there's little tricks to all this stuff that you got to kind of watch. Now, all this stuff that you're scraping off, all this fat and some of the meat that you're scraping off this hide, can all be used for bait, especially for things like coon and possum that are carrion eaters anyway. And we just talked today on the trap line a little bit, possum being worth $6 for a large possum. you know, it's worth trying to trap some of those. If you're going after coon anyway, and you get them, it's not that big a deal. I wouldn't be concerned with getting a few possums, for sure, if you're trying to sell them. But you can see I got a stubborn piece of meat right there. So I might just take my knife out. And you're pretty much going to do this like you're filleting a fish. You're just going to trim that meat off, just like that, as thin as you can get it. And then you'll be able to scrape the remainder of it off with a fleshing knife. But that meat, again, is good bait. So don't just get rid of it, because it's going to make really good bait for possums and coons. I'm throwing it all on the ground. I'll collect it all up here in a few minutes and use that to bait coon traps here in about a week. Okay, like I said, you know, if there's a little bit of meat left on this thing, I don't care. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'd rather have a little bit of meat left on it if I'm going to try to use this fur for any kind of trade value. Now that I have it flushed the best I'm planning to flush it, I'm going to pull it up, nose on, ears tucked in, bottom lip tucked in, just like this. Make sure that the legs are straight. I've got to make sure that my tail is completely split out so that there's no bone in there to rot. Once that's done, then I can pull this thing up and use these ears to pull the hide down tight. So I'll stretch it out as best I can. You can see this dude is almost longer than the stretcher. And the only problem with that is this is the longest stretcher I've got. So we're going to leave it on here for a few days, and it'll shrink up a little bit when we do that. We'll get right to the outside of the hide here and pull it down as far as we can pull it, and hook those teeth in just like that, and then pull it down against it. We'll do the same thing on the other side. We'll come to the outside so we're getting in the meat of the hide, and we'll pull that down, and we'll hook those teeth in and pull them down just like this, and that will keep that hide stretched out. Okay, so here's our ears, our eyes. We got a hole right there. That's bad, but it is what it is. It just happens sometimes. Nothing you can do about it. Like I said, it's not completely fleshed. It's got some scrap on it still, but I don't care about that if I'm trying to sell that hide or trade it in its raw state. If I were trying to tan it, I'd want it cleaner than that. Okay, so let's talk about this hide for a minute from a trade value or selling value perspective, all right? Like I said, I left a little bit of meat on the hide. They're going to run this thing through a machine anyway if you're selling this to a fur buyer. I've got it turned out like this until it starts to dry. Then I'll turn it back, and I'll turn it back again. We're going to have to cut a sight window in here, right here where the scrotum was anyway, later on when we've got it on the stretcher, so that they can see that fur on the back to grade the fur once it gets hard. Now there's a hole right here in the belly. I'll give you one guess what that is, okay? So that's not a knockoff hole because it's supposed to be there. Right here's a scrotum, so that hole is there for a reason. Now, there is a hole on this other side here, and this is where he was shot with a .22. You're allowed 2 .22 caliber bullet holes with no knockoffs. There's no sense trying to sew that stuff up and hide it because the fur buyers are going to see it. When they grade those furs, they're going to notice it. And if they don't notice it and they notice it later, then they're less apt to give you top dollar next year. I've got one hole up here in the head, nose area. To me, that's not a big deal. They're not going to use that hide, that portion of the hide. They sell the heads and the tails and most of that stuff anyway. They sell that stuff off as scrap fur. That's why you see so many of them in piles at rendezvous and fairs and things like that, in big boxes of coyote faces and coyote tails, things like that. It's because they're not using it for the garment industry. Now, if you wanted to sell this thing to someone for making a hat or a garment privately, or you want to use it for trade value, you know that hole up there in the top is not very good. I wouldn't want to see that if I were trying to make a hat out of that necessarily. But you could sew that up while it's still wet, and it will stretch out a little bit when it's dry, but it would cover the hole for the most part. I'm not going to worry about that on this coyote. The ears are turned in. The bottom lip is turned in. I didn't skin a lot out around the lip area because I didn't want to tear the face on it up anyway. And again, the fur buyer doesn't care about that. If there's some meat and stuff on the face that's dried out, they're not going to worry about that because they're going to use a machine to come through here and take care of this thing anyway and put that through a commercial tanning process. Okay guys, so we got both of our coyotes skinned out and on the stretchers. We'll get them hung up to dry. I'll be right back. Okay fellas, so in case anybody's wondering, I do wash my hands with an alcohol-based hand wash when I'm done doing this kind of stuff. And I'll rinse them off with water after that and soap. I appreciate you guys joining me for this quick video today. I just wanted to go over a couple things about flushing, a couple little tidbits about what fur buyers look for according to what I learned from NAFA at the Fur Takers of America College last year and this year as well. And also wanted to talk to you guys just a little bit on the trap line this morning, doing a reset, and just have a quick conversation about that as well. I thank you for joining me for this video. I thank you for everything you do for me, for my school, for my family, my sponsors, affiliates, and friends, and I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. Thanks, guys.